Hello everyone, welcome to the Forum for Global Studies latest interview. I, Dr. Sandeep Tripathi, founder FGS. Eyes of the entire world are on the forthcoming 15th BRICS Summit to be held on 22nd and 3rd August in Johannesburg, South Africa. The BRICS Summit is going to take place at a crucial juncture when the existing global order is facing unprecedented challenge in the domain of economic integration, global governance, and geopolitics. The future rivalry between the US and China, outdated Bretton Woods institutions, ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, disruption of global supply chain system, and subsequent Western sanctions have further motivated to challenge the existing US-led so-called liberal international order. Today we have with us a very distinguished guest, Professor Karin Costa Vazquez. Professor Kosta is Associate Professor and Assistant Dean for Global Engagement, OP Jindal Global University. Professor Costa Vazquez also served as the Deputy Director of the UK Prosperity Fund in Brazil, which supported Brazil's transition to low-carbon, high-growth economy. We have with us a very founding member, founder FGS Forum for Global Studies, Professor Cassio Jin. Professor Cassio Jin is a professor of international law at Hans, Brazil, and he has played a very tremendous role in shaping the directions and the trajectory of FGS. Thank you so much, both of you are here for joining us in today's latest interview program. Now, I would like to ask some questions from our guest, Professor Costa. My first question, what is your take on the projection of BRICS common currency? Will it pose a potential challenge with the dollar-dominated global economic system?
Thank you very much, Sandeep, for having me at FGS online and hopefully in person very soon. And thank you also to Cassio for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be among Brazilian and Indian friends. On the common currency, I think if I may, Dr. Sandeep, I'm going to give a step back and look at the vision that united the 5 BRICS countries in 2009 during the first summit in Russia. And at that point, obviously the world was going through a major financial crisis, especially the developed countries in the so-called global north. And amid that very turbulent time, the emerging economies of the BRICS, and at that time BRIC, South Africa was still not a member, it would join the BRICS the following year, were doing relatively well. And not just that, they were growing and also spearheading some of very important solutions to development challenges these countries were facing. So let's take the case of Brazil, for example. During the 2000s, we managed to reduce poverty, extreme poverty, in large amounts and greatly due to public policies like the cash transfer program, Bolsa Familia. And like Brazil, several other countries of BRICS countries also had their experiences in poverty, environmental protection, and you name it. But one of the challenges that united all these 4, then 5 countries was their aspiration, their ambition to have a more inclusive multilateral system, and specifically an economic governance that was representative precisely of these emerging economies and their weight in global economy. but not only those 5 countries, but also the broader global south. And this was measured specifically by the voting shares, the quota shares voting power of these countries in institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. So why am I giving this step back to answer your question on common currency? Because I like to phrase that one way of looking at this issue is that it's BRICS are aiming for a reform or de-dollarization or reduce the influence of the US dollar. This is one way of looking at it. But I guess that the origin of the motivations that these countries had at the very beginning, and which still hold them together 15, 16 years later, is it's not a challenge. I mean, of course, challenging or de-dollarization or how you want to name it is a consequence. So it's almost like the two sides of the same coin. But this is not what they're asking. They're asking is for a more inclusive and representative multilateral system. And it almost sounds like rhetoric, right? Like just giving this step back to say that there are two ways of looking at the same issue. And this issue that it's actually one of the main motivations of why BRICS are discussing a common currency or a BRICS payment system, or you name it. So now going to the currency specifically. As far as I understand, proposals that have been discussed and actually approved in previous summits, including in 2015 in Russia, and if I'm not mistaken, also in 2019 in Brazil, was the BRICS payment system. So essentially, it's a mechanism to settle transactions, commercial transactions amongst the 5 members in their own currencies. So this BRICS payment system is not necessarily talking about or doesn't necessarily depend on a common currency to exist. Some people would argue that a common currency would facilitate the settlement of the transactions, but we know there are other examples in other regions that a similar payment system exists, and there is no such need for a common currency. And take Mercosur, take ALADI in our own region, in Latin America. So one thing doesn't depend on another. So the payment system, which has been agreed, doesn't depend on the creation of a common currency. Then the question of where the proposal of the common currency comes from, right? I've seen over the past months in the pre-negotiations for this summit in South Africa, different proposals being vented out in the media and amongst informed circles. My sense is that we have a minimum, which is the BRICS payment system, or if you say mechanisms to facilitate trade amongst the BRICS countries. And then you have let's say an end goal or bigger vision of where these different mechanisms and including the payment system would lead to. And going back to my initial point, when these 5 countries got together in 2009, 2010 to have a more inclusive multilateral economic governance, multilateral system, is precisely the end goal or the end vision seems to be with these different mechanisms create more financial hubs in the world, right? So I've heard this from colleagues in Russia and elsewhere. And of course, as an end goal, you need to go back and break down into doable steps, right? Otherwise, if you just only have the far end vision, you don't really necessarily move forward in practice. So my sense is that the currency would be a later stage, if so to speak, of this different stepping stones for this broader vision of different financial hubs and de facto more inclusive or more representative economic system.
Incredible answer. Just very well on the point, Professor Vazquez. I completely agree with you.
My second question to you, we have seen that at a time when we are going to give a challenge, this dollar-dominated economic system. But the reality is that only US contributes 24% GDP of the world. And all 5 countries, all the BRICS 5 countries, it shares 31.59% of the total world GDP. So does it, how do you see this, imbalance? One country, one side, 24%, and other 5 countries just have a economic size is only 31% something. So is it feasible, is it pragmatic to think, to challenge this dollar-dominated global economic system? Professor Costa.
If your starting point is to challenge something, well, certainly these economies are big enough to make a considerable wave in whatever financial system or economic system, right? But still, in practice, like challenging or reducing dollar influence it's a major undertaking. And if we look back in economic history, any change of standard took less than 50 years and 1 or 2 global wars to happen, right? I'm not trying to make bad predictions here. Let's stay with the long time horizon for any change in the economic system to happen. Hopefully, if this happens, which I think it will at some point, I think the only certainty is that any economic system will last forever. So I think that's a very unreasonable assumption, right? So it's going to change. That's a fact, as it has already changed 3 times in economic history, at least. But then at what cost and how long it will take, that's a second question. But so if you frame the question as a challenge, yes, it's going to take time. We have examples in history to prove this. But again, if you look from the perspective that the goal is not necessarily challenging, but giving alternatives to countries, then it's already happening, right? Of course, it's a very important political sign. Ultimately, in practice, you will see these alternatives materializing as soon as companies which are trading, or countries and companies trading one with another, actually accept to transact in local currencies. You might see many of them actually still preferring to have the US dollar, right? But the simple fact of having the option, I think it's already a very good progress to sign. These countries are maturing, that these countries are thinking or being active in creating their own systems that hopefully will function better for them, for their different purposes, for their different goals.
Thank you very much for your insights. We have seen that organizations just like BRICS and SU, the dominance, the Chinese dominance, and in this, when we are talking about to challenge the US dollar system, and even the challenge, in my initial remarks, I had said the so-called liberal order. So there is lots of rift and division within the BRICS also. And there is apprehension that it might, China might establish its own dominance within the BRICS. So I think there is a lack of consensus, right, among the 5 countries. They are not fully fledged to agree for this common currency. And in that context, I would like to quote Indian External Affairs Minister, Dr. A new BRICS currency, and the focus is on strengthening the national currency. India, how do you see India's stand on the common currency, Professor Costa?
India is acting on its own legitimate interests, and who am I to comment on this? This is an option, a sovereign option of India, and should be respected as it must be respected the choices and the options of any of the other countries in the BRICS and outside the BRICS. As I was saying in my first question, the way I see that this discussion on the common currency is actually if it is indeed an option, right? Because what we have seen in past summits are discussions on trade facilitation mechanisms and specifically a BRICS payment system, which doesn't necessarily depend on a common currency. So this common currency to me feels like a much longer term vision or building block towards building multiple financial hubs in the global south and really having a more inclusive economic system, right? So this to say that I think the idea of the common currency is still within far reach, and we should probably and also considering these positions of countries who have already mentioned they're not willing to look at this issue right now, but look at more domestically how to strengthen their own currencies. To think what are some of the other more immediate steps that can be done to reduce trade costs within the BRICS, to facilitate trade, to increase access to BRICS markets, and perhaps park for the time being the discussion on the currency. I think that's probably a little bit more medium long term to my sense.
Thank you so much, Professor Costa, for your insights. The last question to you, that BRICS expansion. Well, lots of talks about the BRICS expansion. And still there is a lack of consensus. India made it clear that, first of all, we should to set a clarity, guidelines for the inclusion of the new members. So that is not the case that if the other countries is willing to join. Even it's a very interesting point that French president is willing to come to join and these groups. So obviously we know that BRICS has a lot of attention and it is going to the voice of the global south. There's no debate on that. However, regarding the expansion, how do you see still there is a stumbling block regarding the guidelines, regarding the setup, some standard to join this group?
I think we can expect three scenarios and probably two more realistic than the other one. So the first scenario is one which countries don't agree on criteria and processes for the expansion of membership. And I think we shouldn't be working with this scenario. From what I understand, the countries have already agreed on the criteria and the process for the inclusion of new members and are expecting to announce already a certain number of countries. Then we have two scenarios in hand. One, with criteria and processes agreed, will the BRICS opt for a gradual expansion with two modalities, most likely already announced during the summit, members and partners, so different status for countries, or another option, will they opt for a fast expansion, right? My personal opinion on this is that a gradual expansion is probably more appropriate at this point of time, as the BRICS themselves even test these criteria that they have agreed upon. but also to avoid a situation in which a fast expansion could have, yes, a very strong political demonstration effect. Yes, the global South, and we're not supportive of these geopolitical divisions and so on and so forth. But the risk is that it becomes more difficult to agree on common agendas and even more importantly, implement them. My sense is that a more gradual expansion at this time could possibly make more sense, and especially if this expansion is announced together with the launch of the payment system, because then you don't just have the demonstration, the political demonstration effect, but you also have the substance attached to it. So you could possibly announce the agreement to launch or to start discussions or form a technical committee to move forward with the implementation of the BRICS payment system amongst the 5 original members, and essentially building on the bilateral agreements that already exist. And let's take the case of Brazil and China, who have just signed a bilateral swap agreement during Lula's visit to China a few months ago. But Russia and India also have one. Russia and China also have one. Russia and other Latin American countries also have similar agreements. So to my sense, this BRICS payment system could possibly build on these bilateral agreements which already exist and create an ecosystem that it's open for the new members to join. And then if you present a gradual expansion with a very concrete mechanism, then you not only have the voice or the demonstration effect, the political effect, but you also have, you give materiality to it.
Thank you so much, Professor Costa, for your valuable insights on these important concerns. Now I'd like to invite Professor Cassio in, and now the rest of this session he will moderate from the Brazilian perspective. So you are most welcome, Professor Cassio, please.
Hello, good morning. At least here in Brazil, it's still early morning up to mid-noon. So on a rather cold Curitiba day. Thank you very much, Professor Vazquez, for accepting our invitation for this discussion. I would have 2 questions for you. The first one, let's see, the recent expansion, of course, connected with Dr. Sandeep's last question. Lula this week has spoken in favor of a BRICS expansion, including Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Argentina. However, the surprise frontrunner for Argentina presidential elections, Mr. Milei, has defended the re-dollarization of Argentinian economy, ending the pesos. So let's imagine a de-dollarization of BRICS economy and then the possibility of a re-dollarization in part of certain aspects of BRICS economies while having a common currency and enhancing intra-blocks payment system, as you said, Professor, but at the same time, we have the possibility of one economy re-adopting dollar as their... how would you see this possibility of a re-dollarization of these economies?
I think for the BRICS, it's really a conundrum in the sense that, well, if you approve Argentina membership now, in a worst case scenario, it might eventually withdraw in a couple of months, right? Or in a not so worst case scenario, the hypothesis that you presented, it continues in BRIC, but then in the BRICS, but then you have different arrangements within the same bloc, and while countries advocating for one thing, other countries realizing different things. So I think my sense is that this could potentially be resolved through the criteria, and especially if the BRICS indeed agree with these two-level type of membership, so membership and partnership. One possibility, I'm not saying that it's going to happen, I don't have a crystal ball, but one possibility to sort this short-term issue with Argentina is to have Argentina included as a partner, and eventually with time graduate to a full member, if even if these criteria are indeed moving forward, right? So that's really a cautious or a more prudent way to deal with these natural volatilities in any electoral process, right? In the short term.
I just recall that here in Brazil, we also had a former president which was critic to China, mostly, but nevertheless, he traveled to Russia shortly before the war and was met with Putin with the shortest table possible, while Macron and European leaders had the big table with a very large distance between the countries. Our president met with Putin on a small table as friends, chatting, and he traveled to India, nevertheless. He talked with Modi during the pandemic, and this is something that we Brazilians are very grateful to India, because I recall President Modi saying, "Don't worry, we are your partners." When we had a lack of alcohol for cleaning hands during the pandemic, India said, "Don't worry, we are your friends. We will help you the best way we can." And you provided. And Russia did the same, are still providing fertilizers here to Brazil, which are fundamental to our economy. But I would have the second question to Professor Vazquez. The US dollar has an economic aspect, but at the same time, it has a strategic/military one. As Woodrow Wilson put, it is a deadly weapon. Economic sanctions are a deadly weapon. Now, if we are talking about not just a de-dollarization of the world, but also the creation of payment systems outside of European and US control, do you think that this will, economic sanctions will still have teeth, will still have power in a, let's say, fragmented international payment world?
They will. I think they will. Because again, I believe the creation of these systems, they give options, but the options, they become real as they are used. And then until you move from the proposal to the actual implementation, and from implementation to countries and companies and people using these systems, it's a long way. And until you have enough people using these systems to make a dent, to make a change, it takes a lot of time. So I'm not downplaying with this comment. I'm not downplaying the importance of the BRICS mechanism or whatever other initiative. You have to begin. You have to do it, right? You have to begin from some point. But I don't think it's reasonable to expect that any major change in the short term. Perhaps in the medium and the long term, yes. That's my sense. But again, the alternatives have to be put on the table, right? The governments, they have to steer direction, to give direction to these innovations, right, to happen. You cannot expect that the markets will do this on their own. They're probably never going to do it, right? On their own for obvious reasons. So it has to start at some point, but then to expect that the simple creation of these mechanisms already impacts the influence of the dollar or the teeth that the sanctions might have, that's a second level, I think.
I agree. I think that
it's really gives a lot of headache.
Yes,
for sure.
I think that one maybe unexpected turn of events due to the sanctions that were imposed in Russia was, okay, Russia produces oil, Russia cannot sell it to Europe, Russia cannot sell it to the United States, but China wants oil. India wants oil. Brazil wants oil. Then, well, let's buy. If we cannot use one system, we have to use the other ones.
Right. Actually, your comment just reminds me that the effectiveness, let's say, or the strength of the sanctions are highly questionable already, with or without the payment systems, right? Precisely because of these reasons. Like there are many flaws, and as especially as countries grow mature and more assertive in their foreign policies and economic policies, these things will happen. And we'll prove once and again that the sanctions as a mechanism itself is already problematic, right? And it's not because of the payment system. I think there is another discussion related to this. So we talk a lot about the currency and the payment system and how this might affect the sanctions, but we don't discuss that much. For example, the contingent reserve agreement. And you might remember that the CRA was created also, I think, in 2015 during the Fortaleza Summit, along with the New Development Bank, 15 or 14. Now I'm missing the years. And the whole idea at that time was that the New Development Bank would provide financing for infrastructure projects, and the CRA, like the World Bank would do. Even though at that time the World Bank was already not really directing too much finance to infrastructure projects. So it was not only to challenge Bretton Woods institutions because of the quota reform, but also because of market failure, so to speak, that these Bretton Woods institutions were not financing what the emerging markets needed the most: infrastructure for their development, right? But the other piece of this story is the contingent reserve agreement, which was created to provide liquidity in case of economic crisis and act very similarly to the IMF, right? And I'm happy that we never had to use it. But that also raises the question: is into the extent that is this CRA actually functioning, operational? Information I have is that it's still under testing, it's not really functioning. But anyways, this to say that another way of looking at this discussion is from the point of view in which, let's say, take the example of Argentina, right? Or even Venezuela and Cuba, who also applied from Latin America, or Ethiopia. All these countries are either under sanctions or embargoes, or are renegotiating their debts with the IMF, right? So if they become members, could they apply for support from the contingent reserve agreement? And if they do, and if the CRA steps in and offers, then it's another way to see how this whole system could be challenged, and again, probably in the short term not enough to make a real change, but certainly to give a very good headache to some countries.
And maybe a fairer global order due to these agreements. They once when impression I had regarding the NDB was the key change was we can borrow here from Brazil. Brazil could borrow money in reais and pay interest in reais, as the same way as India could borrow in rupees and Russia can use rubles. This provides liquidity. This, I think, the exposition, the risk that a country takes when borrowing from the IMF, it's way bigger because you can have you have the double-edged sword. You have to pay in dollars, but at the same time, when you borrow in dollars, your local currency will go down, and then you will have, oh, they are borrowing dollars. You will have a major problem, and I think that the BRICS will provide alternatives. I think this is really the future option for our countries. Thank you very much for your considerations, Professor Vazquez. Dr. Sandeep, would you have further comments and questions, please?
Thank you so much, Professor Kaisho, for your very insightful questions to Professor Kosta. Now, I would like to request you for a vote of thanks for this session.
I am going to give the vote of thanks, which way we are not really used here in Brazil as the vote of thanks. I'm getting better at doing this. First of all, I am sorry for those who don't speak Portuguese, but I would like to share a couple of words in Portuguese since I am talking with a Portuguese-speaking professor. Professora, muito obrigado. É uma imensa alegria ver como nós aqui do Brasil estamos explorando os países dos BRICS e pesquisando os países do BRICS. Thank you very much, Professor. It was a wonderful thing to discuss with you this morning and to be having inter-BRICS research and to see Brazilian, Indian, Chinese, South African and Russian professors, researchers discussing BRICS problems with a BRICS view. I think it is fundamental in a decolonial perspective when we are getting rid of former impositions from cultural perspective, from a very mindset that we were taught here in Brazil that everything that comes from abroad, mostly if it is from Europe or the US, is better than us. And now we are looking at our brothers and sisters from BRICS countries. It is different. We were used to be looking upwards to see how it was things. Now we look at China, we don't look like this. We look like, hi. We look at India, hi. They are on our sides. They are equal with us. And this is wonderful to be discussing. And so why do we have to keep looking at other countries which have different values from us, which have a different perspective and different objectives? To be discussing de-dollarization with you today was a wonderful moment. It was very insightful, it was very profound, and I really do believe it is one step from further collaborations between you and FGS. I am sure about this. And I would like to finish by something that our current president said lately. Why do we have to trade in dollars? He said something like this in Portuguese. Why do we have to trade in dollars? So why do we have to keep looking at some countries which have different perspectives, which would not fit into ourselves? So thank you very much, Professor Vazquez, for this wonderful meeting today.
Thank you.